Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Riverwood Conservancy's latest webinar, our latest bird photography webinar. This one we're focusing all on taking great shots of birds in flight, like the one that you can see on your screen right now. So capturing birds in flight, not always an easy thing to do because they are fast moving, they are moving objects, and we have a professional wildlife photographer here today in Dave Taylor to guide you through taking some really great shots of images of birds in flight. Thanks so much for joining us today. Again, we do appreciate the fact that you're with us, and as always, we do appreciate having your support financially as well as we deal with the challenges of COVID-19. If you are willing and capable of making a donation, of course, we would very much appreciate that at theriverwoodconservancy.org, so we can continue to have education events like this, and we can also come back strong in the park with our conservation efforts when things are a little bit more normal and we can get back into the soil at Riverwood. My name is Rashid Clark. I'm the marketing specialist at the Riverwood Conservancy, and I'm joined by Dave Taylor, our resident wildlife photographer, and we are also very grateful for the support of Armstrong Bird Food for all of the birding programs that we conduct at Riverwood, which of course we hope to start up again soon when it is safe to do so. So Dave Taylor, wildlife photographer and author of more than 40 books on wildlife and ecology, and he's produced educational videos and material about wildlife for school curriculums. Of course, he's been generous enough to provide the guidance over these last several webinars. Of course, we do have a few more happening this summer. More details on that later. But for now, I'll turn things over to Dave.
Hi, thanks Rashid, and welcome to, I think this is the third one. And we're going to talk about photographing birds in flight. And I know that as an instructor at Humber for 25, 30 years, that was a question that often came up. And the good news is it's gotten easier and easier for people to do it. So we're going to start with some questions and some thoughts about it. First thing I would say, if you're a budding bird photographer, and I've seen some of your work on Facebook and whatnot, some of you are really good. And I noticed that an awful lot of the pictures that you take are fairly stagnant. The bird is standing in a perch or on the ground or swimming in the water or whatever. And it's not easy to do those and to do those well. And some of the shots I've seen are excellent. But I think everybody dreams of getting that shot of bird in flight. So my first advice is study the bird's behavior. While you're watching that bird in flight, study it. Learn to anticipate what it's going to do. What are the clues that tell you it's going to take off? Now this bird is a dipper. It's the American dipper. And it hunts on the bottom of fast-running rivers and streams for insect larvae. So while this is not a picture of a bird in flight, it illustrates the concept. You've got a bird that you can't see, it's underwater, and you want to get that shot the instant that it pops out of the water and lands on the rock. And you do that because you've been able to watch this bird for probably, in this case, 15 minutes or more, just observing how it behaves and getting ready for that shot. Now, of course, there's a bit of luck, and there always will be a bit of luck in this. So as we go through the points in this talk on bird photography in flight, you're going to see that a lot of the stuff, it's not just one solution. It is a combination of all those solutions that make it work. So first piece of advice, start with slow flying birds, if you can find them. And often that translates into bigger birds because it gives you more of a target to aim for. And especially with ducks in the flock or whatever, you've got a number of them going by. You miss the first group, you might get the second group. With a great blue heron like this, you wait until you see the signs for taking off, and then off you go. Now, this picture isn't just about a slow flying bird. First of all, you have to know that all these pictures have been cropped to 16 by 9 for the slideshow. So there was more space in this. I had a lot more room to work, and that will become a point a little later on. But slow flying birds, particularly large waterfowl, are really good. Turkeys are slow flying, but getting them to fly is another question. So I'd start with ducks. Next thing you want to do is optimize your camera settings. So you want to shoot with the highest shutter speed you can go with. Now, I'm going to acknowledge some advice I got from my good friend, Gary Hall, who I often go out shooting with. He does a lot more bird photography than I do. I'm kind of more of a generalist photographer. He's been really specializing in birds and doing some excellent work. So he wants to get the highest shutter speed. Well, that's pretty good advice because you want to stop the wings. You shoot with a wide open aperture. What that does is it blurs the background so that the background lets your bird stay sharp and the background isn't distracting. You want to have continuous autofocus. So you're shooting constantly, and usually the first shot that you take, you're not going to get a very good picture. It's the second and the third. Focus points. Where you have a camera that has multiple focus points, you want to get those focus points. And for most people, it is about 9 or 10 focus points in the center of the screen. And I'll tell you, the center of the screen works best. You can move the bird to the left and the right whenever you do your final cropping, but shooting it is center because it's a natural, it's a direct flight or sight from your eye to the bird. And then tracking sensitivity. If you have newer cameras like the Canon Mark II 7D, it allows the camera to track the bird, and if something pops up like a lamppost or a person, it continues to track where the bird should be, and that gives you a little bit more advantage. So you want to set the tracking sensitivity, and that might vary on a newer Nikon or a Sony or whatever, but if it's available, use it. So this is a roseate spoonbill taking off. I followed it. This is the shot that I chose. Now they're a fairly slow flying bird, so you can see that the background is a bit blurred. Okay, now, how do you optimize the shutter speed? Well, again, Gary was the one that suggested this. Set the ISO on automatic. Most of us will go out, and if you read the books, it says set your ISO at 400. Well, yeah, folks, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, ISO 400 was the ideal setting. It gave you the sharpest digital picture. But today, you can set that ISO up to 1600 and some cameras much higher. I find that shooting an automatic, it ranges, if there's lots of light and you want to shoot at a 2500th of a second, shoot that ISO on automatic. That might be shooting at 400 ISO. If it's a low light and you're out and the sun is starting to fade, it might be shooting at ISO 3200 or higher. But you're going to get the picture because it's going to stop the wings. Now that picture that you see there is a gannet diving into the water. That can only be done and stopped at a high ISO. And again, wide open priority, high shutter speed. So this is an example of that. Swallow coming in and feeding its young. The swallow was there for exactly one picture. And this camera shoots at about 10 pictures per second. That took less than a second for the bird to feed. So you had to have everything set and ready, high shutter speed. And even at the high shutter speed, you will notice that the most distant wing is slightly blurred. But the birds themselves are sharp, as is the branch. Pan and scan at a low shutter speed. Now, everything we just said, you reverse it. You shoot at a slower or lower ISO. You shoot at a much slower shutter speed. I would suggest a 60th. I've even done it at a 30th. And the effect you're going to get, if this will move, why isn't that moving? Oops, sorry. I'm going to go back one. The effect you're going to get is the blurred background. The wings are going to be blurred. Ideally, you're following the bird so its head, which isn't moving, should be fairly sharp. In this case, I deliberately wanted to shoot through branches, so I pre-focused on the bird where it was going to be and shot through the branches to give the effect of this bird flying through a forest. Consider not using a teleconverter because they do limit your focal points. So to go back to my camera, this little piece right here, where my finger is the teleconverter. It's a 1.4. So it takes this 400 millimeter lens and turns it into a 560 millimeter lens. But there's a cost to doing that. Instead of having access to all of the shutter points, or the focal points rather, I have very few that I can use with the teleconverter on. Now, if a bird's flying towards you or flying past you, you want to have as many of those focal points in play. So if I'm doing serious flight photography, I will take off the teleconverter. And that gives you a wider range. I'm no longer shooting at 560, I'm shooting at 400. It allows you to include other action in it. So here you've got a peregrine falcon that's just killed a pigeon who is being chased by a herring gull who would like to steal the pigeon. In the end, the peregrine falcon got away with it. But if I had shot with the teleconverter on, I would have been limited in action just to the peregrine falcon. Now, if you're shooting birds, one of the problems you have is finding the bird. And again, going back to shooting with a zoom lens, you might have it zoomed all the way into 400 for your shot, because that's you want to get the close-up, but you can't find the bird. So back it off a bit, find the bird, zoom in. And you may need to practice this a little bit. But by zooming in, it helps you get the focus in place. And so with a fast-moving bird like a tern or a peregrine falcon, this works very well. And I found it a very handy trick. And I suggest you follow. Now, if you're shooting with a fixed focal length, straight 400, obviously you can't do that. But that's one of the reasons why I've gone to shooting with a 100-400 rather than 500 millimeter. Because with the 500 millimeter, it's fixed. If I can't find the bird, I'm done. This way I've got some give. When shooting a bird about to take off, I zoom out. I've been caught with this so many times in my pictures where I've been zoomed in tight on the bird and it's taken off and half its wings, like my arm, is out of the picture. You want to give it a ratio that the bird, when its wings go up, they don't go out of the picture, they stay in the picture. So I generally try and assume takeoff picture is going to be about 3 times the bird's height. And you can see in this great gray owl, if I'd zoomed in tight on the owl, I would have lost that wingtip. So you want to back off a little bit and consciously do this. You really want to consciously do it because almost it goes against your instinct. Here you've got a wonderful portrait of an owl or a duck or whatever, and then suddenly it takes off and you're left with nothing. You've got a great picture of the eyes of the bird, but you don't have the action. Now, also about takeoff, when you're about to shoot a bird taking off, anticipate the direction it's going to fly and then zoom back. Now, I would zoom back more than 3 times, especially with the newer cameras. I find when a bird takes off, by the time I react, if I was zoomed in tight, it's already halfway out of the frame. So what I want to do is I want to catch it taking off, partway in the frame, and almost invariably it's going down and then going out. So you want to be sure that you have room for that bird to fly, and then you start clicking. And I also find that keeping focus on that, once the camera is going click, 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 you can't see because the shutter is closing and there's that brief blindness. So if you're shooting 20 frames a second or 10 frames a second, you got this going on and it's very difficult to see the birds. So I try and imagine where it's going to go, and I'm hoping that it flies parallel and not towards. But if it does fly towards me, like this cedar waxwing, I've still given it room in the frame to fly. And that was a single shot. The bird took off, and I got it because I had room for it, and I was able to crop in and get that picture. An easy way to get flight shots is to set up on a nest or a perch where you know where the bird's going to be. If you go to Riverwood, sometimes you will see places where photographers have actually tied a branch onto another tree or something to encourage the bird to land there. And you'll see that a lot around bluebird nests and whatnot. I find that when I'm shooting at a perch, I do not look through the camera. I have the camera on a tripod and I'm watching the bird. So the perch is here, the bird is out of sight, but I'm watching it. When it starts to fly, well before it gets to the perch, I'm starting to shoot because I want that shot or that series of shots as it comes in. And in order to do that, rather than get down and look through the camera, I've got a remote control shutter release connected to the camera, and I start shooting. And okay, so I'm going to shoot 20, 30 pictures, maybe more, maybe less. But I'm only after that one shot that shows the bird coming in for a landing. And if you're lucky, it's got prey in its talons or in its mouth, and you walk away with a picture you're pretty happy with. In this case, it's a house wren. It's flying into its hole. And I sat there well over an hour or two just to get that shot, taking lots of times, watching it fly in. Sometimes the pictures worked, sometimes they didn't. I'm particularly happy with this one with the daddy long legs in its mouth. The other trick is to use the better beamer flash, which gives you a bit more pop and a bit more light on the bird. However, with better beamers, one of the things that will limit it is the shutter speed can only be upwards to 250th of a second. Now that may have changed with even newer cameras than I have, but this gives you a little bit of pop light and some fill. So this is a hummingbird shot with a better beamer. Now you notice that the wing, the back wing, you can see a double image. That's because the wings are moving so fast. The beamer has stopped it in one position, but the exposure went on longer than the 2,000th of a second that the flash went off. So it catches that blur motion. And you can use that effectively. If you shut it down a bit and shoot it at the 60th of a second, you can get some really artistic pictures. I wasn't really going for that kind of artistic shot in this. Use your motor drive effectively. Your camera will fire most of them. I remember when I went to Africa, in the 1990s, we had the first motor drive cameras, and they were doing like 3 or 4 frames a second. We thought that was spectacular. Now you've got cameras up to 10 frames per second. The new mirrorless camera that Canon just announced does, I think, 30 frames a second on a certain setting, maybe more. That's incredibly fast. You'll go through a lot of pictures. The fastest I have is 20 frames a second, which is the speed of a movie almost. In this case, you're following the white pelicans and you're getting a series of shots, bang, 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 and you choose the one that you like the best. Consider composition. Whenever you're shooting, you know the bird's going to do something, it's going to fly someplace. Consider where it's going to fly to. Like, is it going to fly against trees? Is it going to go from trees to a bright sky? Is it going to go from a bright sky down into the trees and a dark background? Will your camera cover it? Sometimes you need to manually set the camera because if it's on auto exposure, it may not change from bright to dark quick enough to capture that image. And most cameras I've shot with, there's a bit of a lag time before that balance happens. So if you're really serious, practice. In this case, a pair of bald eagles. Now, the composition was kind of imposed on me in the sense that these two bald eagles were fighting over a fish and they were a good distance away. But I was aware of the background. I was aware that it was blank. I was aware there were other bald eagles sitting in the ground. I knew there was a river there. So I was composing it in my mind. But the other thing is, it takes a bit of luck. I could have also zoomed in on this picture, but I chose it to cut it this way. One of the mistakes a lot of people make is to get a fancy dancy tripod with one of those heads that moves and lets you go over, and you try and shoot birds with it. Most bird photographers really suggest that you do it by hand. You get up, and you're following it and you're looking at it and it's smooth. If you're on a tripod, you might be bent over, you might have been bent back. I just find that this works a lot better. I get better results. Now, maybe if I'm doing video, I might change that, but in all honesty, I find even shooting video without a tripod really works when there's action. So this osprey was tracked. I got really good pictures of it. Shoot birds at a distance, especially with the newer cameras. If you've got over 20 megapixels in your camera, you've got a lot of room to blow it up to a standard 8x10 print. And for the web, if you're putting pictures on Instagram, you don't even have to blow it up that big. So this picture of the kingfisher was taken at quite a distance. But this picture of a kestrel, I could not believe it when I saw it in the camera viewfinder. I took the picture. It was dead center, so the focus points were lined up perfectly. But that picture, if you consider the screen where you see me, that bird was actually about the size of my fist. And when I blew it up, I was able to blow it up to about that size. These new cameras are so impressive. And it's one of the reasons I do not strongly recommend that you go for a bigger lens than a 400 millimeter. Especially if you have a new camera. If you have an older camera, well, 500 still have their purpose. And yet, just on that topic of longer lenses, the longer the lens, the greater the interference you'll see from haze. I remember photographing a grizzly in Yellowstone that was way off. There was snow on the ground, and that really made it bad because it was a warm day and the snow was evaporating and there was a haze. When I shot the grizzly with a 500 with a 2x teleconverter, you could see this haze in the picture. It wasn't sharp, and there's nothing you can do about it. Switch to the 400, a little further out, the picture looked sharper. It wasn't, but it looked sharper. When shooting against an open sky, always open your aperture up. And again, I got to give Gary credit for this. And there's a hint right there. Photograph with somebody else. It's great. I like going out by myself. I like being in the woods or by the pond because I don't have to worry about anybody else making a distraction. But shooting with a friend who's an avid photographer, and I have 4 or 5 people I shoot with on a regular basis, it's the conversation back and forth that really helps you become a better photographer. I've given Gary lots of hints. He's returned the favor by giving me lots of hints. Same with Don and Nagib and a whole bunch of others. It's that conversation that really makes it, and be honest, it's an enjoyable day. Now, during COVID, shooting with a friend is a little more difficult because you have to take separate cars. But if you maintain your distance in the field, it's still a great time. So, with this picture, the Falcon is swooping in. This was on a gray, cloudy day out in Leslie Street Spit. I knew there were going to be birds flying against the sky. I deliberately opened it up, and not 1 stop, but 2 stops. And you do that, you figure it out by taking pictures of a tree or something static, and you look at it and say, is that the tree I want, or do I want to open it up a couple? I don't know if you can hear the screaming in the background, but that is my cat. She likes to do that for some reason that she doesn't want to share with me. Okay, next picture. Shoot on sunny days, but please don't ignore overcast days. If you've been watching the other presentations, I love an overcast day. As long as you're not shooting against the sky, overcast days are wonderful because they give you a richer color. So this red-tailed hawk, there's some reflection off of the snow that's lighting it, but basically, open it up because it's a snowy background. I'm shooting about 1 stop more because it's not against the sky, it's against snow. Open up 1 stop, shooting at high shutter speed, but not quite high enough to stop the wing from blurring a little bit because you want to have that blur sometimes. And it worked, and it gives you that rich color. Had this been a bright sunny day and the sun had not been directly on the hawk, the color wouldn't have been intense. Again, this ties into what we've been talking about. Consider your background. Does it change as the birds fly past? What is there in the foreground that's going to interfere with the image? And can you incorporate that in your image? Where is the light source? Is it behind you? Is it to the side? Is it behind the bird? That's going to change a lot of what you do. What is the quality of the light source? Early morning, kind of an orangey tinge to it. In the old days when I started out, if it was an orange tinge, unless you had an expensive lens, your picture was going to be out of focus because the lenses weren't calibrated for that. High noon, afternoon, is it above, side? Where is that light coming from? What's it like? What's the wind direction? Birds tend to fly into the wind, so be aware of that. And on a windy day, it'll slow the bird down so you'll have more time. And what other factors may cause the bird to fly? So when I was photographing snow geese, there was a really bland shot until a bald eagle flew over. And then the snow geese went up in the sky. Great shooting. In this case, Canada geese going by the mountains, gray day. I waited until the Canada geese got in front of a glacier. I think that's a glacier in the Grand Tetons, and got the shot. And you notice it's not just about the birds, it's about the birds and their habitat. Consider the flight path. Which way is that bird going to fly? Is it going to fly straight at you? Is it going to fly towards you but on an angle, parallel to you, away from you, below you, or above you? And yes, I've had birds fly below me. Certainly when you're on a cliff or you're in an apartment building photographing peregrine falcons, it can certainly happen. So by considering that, so this is a red-winged blackbird, pretty sure it was going to take off. I set the focus and I had it on automatic using the back focus like I talked about earlier. When the bird took off, the camera was focused on its head and I got a pretty good shot, one that I'm pleased with. This is a peregrine going past me. And this was not the same peregrine you saw earlier. It was much closer, very fast moving bird, tracking it as it goes. And you need to practice that. So go out and photograph cars zooming by and things like that and learn how to track something. Of course, birds are a little smaller than cars. Shooting flocks. It's really exciting to get into a situation where you're shooting a flock of birds, especially if there are thousands of them. You're going to get repeated stuff, repeated action. Sometimes you'll get one group take off and then you watch, and often the birds will start bobbing their heads like that before they take off. Canada geese start to talk to each other, then they go. You learn their behaviors, you get ready, but they don't always do it. Sometimes they just, the leader might be trying to convince the other ones, hey, let's go for a flight. And the other ones are saying, no, not today. Sandhill cranes are a good subject for flocks, especially in the fall when you get 2,000 or 3,000 of them. You know that they're invariably going to take off between 10 and 11 o'clock to go in the marsh, and you just wait, and then you compose the picture. And you want to get, when you're taking pictures of birds in flocks, you want to get some depth to it. So the foreground birds are usually the ones you focus on, and the background birds are a little blurry. When you get a massive flock, like you saw earlier in one of my talks of the snow geese where there's 10,000, you just point the camera and shoot. And this is an example of that. Flock of red-winged blackbirds. And sometimes, rather than the organized flock of the sandhill cranes and the Canada geese and the ducks, you want that sense of mass confusion. And sometimes I wonder if I wouldn't have been better off taking this picture had I slowed the shutter speed down, and instead of stopping the action with the wings up and down, it became a blur. And you get these traces of red and black moving through. But certainly, and by the way, that's one of North America's most numerous birds. So we're about winding up the picture part of this thing. Practice your quick draw. Just go out and be ready. So when something happens, you're up and shooting and you've practiced it. And it takes practice. Sometimes finding the bird in the camera is not easy. So whether it's sandhill cranes dancing in a field, or in this case, that dreamed of shot of an osprey coming out of the water with a fish, and you're just there down in Florida, and suddenly you see the osprey jump, and you're just getting out of the car, and you got your grandchildren there, but whoops, boom, 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 and you get the shot. You got to be ready, got to be aware of it. I was really pleased with that. this case, the peregrine flying by with the pigeon again. Really quick, it took off and swung by us, and up goes the camera. None of these shots are done just using the one technique. They're all using a combination of techniques. Study the bird's behavior, be prepared for takeoff, and then anticipate the action. Cannot stress that enough. This is a broad-winged hummingbird sitting on a post. It would land there, would take off from there, would go feed, come back, go feed. So I anticipated the action. I just waited, and then I shot it in such a way that when I wanted to crop it, I could get rid of the post and just have a picture of a broad-winged hummingbird in flight, shot at a high speed with the camera opened up for backlight. The only thing I wish was that the sun had hit that chest or that chin patch and it was a bright red, but you can't have everything. So you go back and try. So that's the end of the slideshow portion of this. I will now take any questions.
Dave, another excellent presentation and lots of really great imagery throughout. I hope we get some good questions. Again, if you have any questions for Dave about photographing birds in flight or just any other bird photography questions in general, please drop them into the Q&A panel, and we'll get to them as we go along throughout the rest of the webinar. So just a couple of questions off the top for me. Well, first of all, the shot of the red-winged blackbirds in that huge crowd. I don't think I've ever seen that many red-winged blackbirds in one place before. Did you happen to mention where that was taken?
That was taken down at on Lake Erie.
Okay.
We've got to think of the location. Long Point Provincial Park. They have all sorts of wheat fields or cornfields out there, and it attracts tens of thousands of red-winged blackbirds. And also starlings. Another place to do starlings and flocks like that is Niagara-on-the-Lake. There seem to be a lot down there in the wineries. So again, fall shot, gotta get them while they're migrating.
It was really interesting because I'm used to seeing them, one, two at a time, and now here's just like a wall of them. So it's really interesting to see that.
And they were all males. I don't think there are any females in that picture, which is really interesting too.
So in terms of other locations in this, Mississauga GTA area, what would be some good places to go for maybe capturing some of these kind of shots, if not that big of a flock, but maybe some other good areas where you can see a few more birds in flight?
I think one of the best locations in general is the lakeshore, from Leslie Street Spit right around to Hamilton Bay. There's often, especially in the winter, large flocks of birds. They begin arriving in the fall. These are birds from the far north that have flown south and they're going to overwinter in the Great Lakes. You tend to get, and sometimes literally thousands of birds there. And each photographer will have his or her favorite spot. You get some really good stuff just down at the foot of Mississauga Road at Haddington Park. And we do a lot of bird hikes there with Luke Fazio and Dan Salisbury because it is such a good location. And you'll also pick up the occasional snowy owl. Peregrine falcons have been seen there. I've seen bald eagles there. But you do get some really wonderful duck displays. The Port Credit Harbor is good just about any time of the year. But if I were to suggest the best time, it's when you start to get ice forming on the lake and the birds are forced in closer. Because a lot of those birds will be quite a distance out feeding on the small crustaceans. Once the ice freezes up, they come in and you tend to get a lot more movement. For migrating birds, Point Pelee, just go there in May and you'll get some really good shots. Not necessarily flight shots, more pose pictures. Problem with a flight shot is, so you have a robin and you get really good pictures of it. If it flies, 9 times out of 10, it's gone. You just don't see it again. So the flight usually ends your pictures. But with waterfowl, sometimes you get so many birds that it's a constant thing. Cormorants are good, but nobody wants to photograph cormorants, except me and maybe a few other diehards.
So a gear question for someone who's maybe just starting up in photography, suggestions for what camera to buy if they're just looking to get into the practice.
Okay, as we said earlier, well, I think the first talk, you have a lot of camera ranges like Canon, Nikon, Sony, they have ranges of cameras. So they've got the entry level, which is $500 and up. Then you've got the semi-pro, which is the type I tend to buy, which is $1,500 to $2,000. And then you got the pro, which is $4,000 to $10,000. You can buy a lot of the entry cameras, even for the price of a semi-pro. Those cameras are going to change. So I would suggest you go with the T-series Canon or the XL or whatever Nikon's series is, the $500 to $700 camera range, and spend your money on the lens, because the lens is going to be what you will keep. The difference between them, the entry-level cameras are plastic. If it gets caught in the pouring rain, basically it's toast. The semi-pro are much more likely to handle wet weather, and the pro ones are really tough. But I would suggest for a beginner, getting the lower price range is pretty good. As for the type of camera, so this is a DSLR. This one, it's bulky. You can't really shoot through the mirror at the back. It doesn't do more than 10 frames a second. And it's been the workhorse. And for photography, still what I would choose. If I was just doing photography, I would go with that. It does video, and it does a good job. This is a mirrorless camera. Canon has just come out with 2 mirrorless cameras. The cheapest of them is $3,500. The most expensive one is about $5,000. They're shooting 40 frames a second, which is really fast. Shoots all kinds of video. And I would say this is the semi-pro model. It's an earlier model. It's still just less than a year old. Does a really nice job of video and a pretty good job with stills. The advantage to this is lighter. You can buy an adapter that will take all the big lenses. It's not very expensive. If you get this adapter, you can see through the lens, which I find very handy when I'm shooting both video and stills. You can't do video with the other camera by looking through the viewfinder. And it's metal and it's well made. But you're still looking at, even at this level, in the neighborhood of $1,700 to $2,000. So that would be my advice. Buy the most inexpensive camera that will meet your need, because you're going to change the camera. And get the best lens you can afford. Put your money into that.
A specific question and a particular type of bird question. Any thoughts on where to shoot a pileated woodpecker?
Where do you find them? Pileated woodpeckers are very, very common in some places. So at Riverwood, we figure in the greater Riverwood ecosystem, we have 2 to 3 pairs. And around Riverwood and the Chapel House, there's 1 pair. We don't publicize where they nest, because that's something we just don't do, and you shouldn't do if you're a birder. But you look at dead trees in the spring, you'll hear them calling a lot, and you go towards where they're calling and you hope to get lucky. Pileated, if they're cooperative, are remarkably cooperative. I've got great shots of them, particularly down in Maryland and in Florida, and I just couldn't believe how the birds just ignored me. I've gotten really good shots at Riverwood and the greater Riverwood ecosystem, but I couldn't say any place other than Florida where I know I could consistently get pileated woodpeckers. And the problem with pileated woodpeckers in Florida is palm tree just doesn't fit if I want to use it for something in a Riverwood presentation. So yeah, Maryland I can cheat with, but Florida not so much.
Florida not so much, yeah, but I don't think people are going to believe that those palm trees are native to Riverwood.
No.
So a question about a dream location for photographing birds that you haven't been to. What would that dream location be?
That I haven't been to? In Ontario?
I'd say it could be anywhere. The question is just what would be your dream location to photograph birds that you haven't been to?
Oh, the Arctic, for sure. I'd like to do some of the Arctic birds.
Well, we seem to have a little bit of a lag right now. We'll just give Dave another minute here.
Am I back on?
Yes, yeah, here we go. We're good again. Okay.
So
Sorry.
repeat the answer?
Yes, please. A little
Okay.
bit of a glitch in the internet connection there. So yeah, once again, the question of if you could take photographs of birds anywhere in the world that you haven't been to yet, where would that be?
The Arctic, for sure. As I was saying, I would be in the Arctic right now if it weren't for COVID. I was doing a 2-week trip up there to photograph polar bears and birds, particularly. That would be my first choice. South Africa, Botswana, I think would offer some interesting birds. England, oddly enough, they have some really remarkable hide systems set up where you can get good pictures, and I'd like to try that. Finland has got some really remarkable stuff. If you watch Planet Earth series, you've seen some of that. The Galapagos, a trip back there, boy, that's heaven for birds. That is just, if you want birds, that's just the best place. Locally, Point Pelee and the spring migration is unbeatable. And there's some places in the States. And we'll address a lot of these places next week, or next talk, which is in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, on safari photography with birds. But yeah, that's a good question. That's a tough one to answer.
And your response does kind of segue nicely into our closing statements, because at this point, no other questions from the audience. So I think we've covered quite a lot of great stuff today. So Dave, thanks again. And as you did mention, we do have a couple more of these bird photography webinars coming up in August. So please be sure to register for those. Details and registration are all available on our website at theriverwoodconservancy.org. And of course, while you're on our website, if you have the financial means, of course, we'd always appreciate a financial donation to help us keep programs like this going and to keep our conservation work in Riverwood going strong once we are back inside the park. Our thanks again to Armstrong Bird Food for all of their support in all of our birding activities, which we, again, hope to get back to soon. So Dave, thank you again for your time and expertise. Any parting words for everyone today?
Just good birding. I'll see you in a couple of weeks, and we'll talk about places to go to do photography. And yeah, get out and enjoy the summer. Thank you, Rashid, as usual. I've enjoyed doing this. We'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks again, everyone. Stay safe.